partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of all the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Members of this Honorable House here present, I wish to inform you that the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker are unavoidably absent for today's sitting. In accordance with Standing Order 4.2, I now call upon you to elect from among yourselves as Speaker a member who is not a minister or a parliamentary secretary.
I beg to move that the member from St. James Central be asked to occupy the second. Yes.
Second.
Is there any other nomination? Okay. Mr. Clark, I now invite you to join the chair as the Speaker for today's proceedings in the House.
House is now in session. Call of the roll.
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Terrelong, Ms. Smith, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Whittle, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Cousins. Ms. Crawford. Ms. Daly. Ms. Davis. Mr. Golding. Mr. Graham. Dr. Guy. Ms. Hamilton. Ms. Hannah. Mr. Henriquez. Mr. Hilton. Mr. Jackson. Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Lee. Mr. Miller. Mr. Montague. Ms. Morrison. Mrs. Nita Garvey. Mr. Paulwell. Mr. Phillips. Dr. Phillips. Mr. Robertson. Mr. Robinson. Mr. Sibley's. Mr. Slowly. Mrs. Vaz. Dr. Wheatley. Mr. Williams. Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Wright. Mr. Speaker.
Statement by ministers.
Hello? Mr. Speaker, I want to first of all welcome you to the chair again, and I know that you have always brought a sense of equanimity and fair play to the chair whenever you occupy it, and we look forward, of course, to today. So, Mr. Chair, the Minister of Finance is intended to make a statement at a later point today. The point I want to make, however, as leader, is that I think I'd like to express on behalf of both the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker their inability to be here today for circumstances beyond their control. Indeed, the Speaker has been a very, very constant and firm leader of this great House, and I think that whenever she is missing, which is so infrequently, it has to do with matter of great importance to her. We want, however, to indicate that the business of the House today will proceed in the manner as stipulated by the order paper, and it is intended that this sitting of the House will be the prelude to possibly the recess for the summer period. We will guide you, Mr. Speaker, in due course. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
The clerk laid on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Land Divestment Annual Report 2021-2022, the Kingston Container Terminal Services Limited Annual Report and audited financial statements for the financial year 2016-2017, the Development Bank of Jamaica Annual Report and audited financial statements for the financial year 2018-2019, the Universal Services Fund Annual Report for the financial year 2020-2021, The Integrity Commission Annual Report for the financial year 2021-2022. The General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedules Number 2, Order 2022, and Resolution under the General Consumption Tax Act. Report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the monetary policy statements covering the second half of 2021. The Quarterly Monetary Policy Report, November 2021, Volume 22, Number 2, and the Quarterly Monetary Policy Report, February 2022, Volume 22, Number 3. The Auditor General's Department Certified Appropriation Accounts, Head 2829, Department Supreme Court, 2011-2012. Mr. Speaker.
Bills brought before the Senate. Petitions. Papers. Report from the committees.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives on the Bank of Jamaica's monetary policy statement covering the second half of the 2021, supported by the Quarterly Monetary Policy Report, November 2021, Volume 22, Number 2, and the Quarterly Monetary Report, February 2022, Volume 22, Number 31.
Notice of motions given orally.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, he will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives on the Bank of Jamaica's monetary policy statement covering the second half of 2021, supported by the Quarterly Monetary Policy Report, November 2021, Volume 22, Number 2, and the Quarterly Monetary Policy Report, February 2022, Volume 22, Number 31, which was laid on the table of the House on the 5th day of July 2022, be approved. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the said Minister of Finance, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, he will move the following motion. The General Consumption Tax Act. The General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedule Number 2, Order 2022 Resolution. Okay, the resolution. Where's the resolution? The resolution. The resolution. Where's the resolution? The resolution as followed, Mr. Speaker. In the exercise of the power conferred upon the Minister by Section 60 of the General Consumption Tax Act, and of every other power hereunto enabling, the following order is hereby made. All right. Whereas, by virtue of subsection 1 of Section 60 of the General Consumption Tax Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may, by order published in the Gazette, amend the schedules to the Act. And whereas, on the 5th day of July 2022, the Minister made the General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedule Number 2, Order 2022, and whereas it is provided by Section 2 of Section 60 of the Act that an order amending the schedule of the Act shall be subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, and whereas it is desirable that the General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedule Number 2, Order 2022, be affirmed by resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedule Number 2, Order 2022 Resolution. And 2. The General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedule Number 2, Order 2022 is hereby confirmed. Mr. Speaker, in reference to the actual date, that the date whereas the Act should be dealt with ought to be the 30th of June 2022. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Question and answers to questions. Motion that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motion relating to sitting of the House. Motion for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Mr. Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Road Traffic Amendment Act 2022.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Transport Authority Act. Sorry, my apologies. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Road Traffic Authority Amendment Act 2022 be read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill, and I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of the bill and to take it through its concluding stages.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, on the matter of subject of public business today, the measures under the name of the Minister of Mining and Transport in relation to the Road Traffic Regulations Resolution, the Transport Authority Amendment Act, the Road Traffic Amendment Act, and the Bauxite Production Levy Act, Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1. Oh, I'm sorry. The Minister of Finance will in fact take the matter in relation to the Bauxite Levy, but the Minister of Transport will deal with the three bills in his name. May it please you.
Please give these out, make sure the speaker and, and the House leader get it. Okay? Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the House, I lay before the House today the revised version of the Road Traffic Regulations 2022. Made under the Road Traffic Act 2018. This Honourable House will recall that the Road Traffic Regulations, which were tabled on Tuesday, February 1, 2022, was subsequently withdrawn and replaced on June 7, 2022, with further changes based on ongoing review. As we are all aware, the Road Traffic Act 2018, we'll call it RTA 218 for short, received the Governor General's assent on December 31, 2018. At the time of consideration by the Joint Select Committee of the Houses of Parliament, it was agreed that the road traffic regulations being made under the RTA 218, once completed, would be tabled in the House because some pertinent matters that were included in the body of RTA 1938 would be incorporated into the regulations instead of the body of the RTA 2018. Additionally, certain matters under the RTA 2018 are subject to affirmative resolution, including in accordance with Section 110(4) of the RTA 2018 regulations pertaining to the tests for driver's licenses and those which provide for a custodial sentence, and in accordance with Section 128 of the RTA 2018, all monetary penalties under the Act and any schedule to the Act except the custodial penalties. As we seek to deliberate on the document before us today, I'll give a general overview of the content, highlighting some of the substantial areas in which there are differences from the legislation now in force and processes with which we are familiar. The Road Traffic Regulation 2022 contains 299 regulations grouped into 13 parts, with each part highlighting particular aspects of road traffic. In addition, various elements of the regulations are expounded on in 13 schedules providing details for implementation. Part 1 introduces the regulations, citing it as the Road Traffic Regulation 2022. It highlights and defines key terms used for easy interpretation of the document and reinforces the obligation of every owner and driver to comply with the regulations. Part 2 addresses the requirements for a motor vehicle to be operated on a road, including obtaining a certificate of fitness, registering a motor vehicle, and obtaining a certificate of title, and licensing, whether yearly or half-yearly. With the advent of changing vehicle technology, requirements for registration of electric motor vehicles and hybrid motor vehicles are stated. Under the new provisions, registration and licensing are separate processes, with registration allowing for the entry of the motor vehicle into the National Vehicle Register, whether it will be licensed for use or not. With the changes to the structure of the National Vehicle Register, the authority will be able to keep more comprehensive records of the vehicles in Jamaica. Vehicles no longer in operation may be declared as dead, retired, inactive, or exported. The new regulations enables the Island Traffic Authority to, by notice, require an owner to present any vehicle, including public passenger vehicles or commercial vehicles, for examination for fitness certification, The steps to be taken if a vehicle being operated on a road is found to be defective are also set out. Furthermore, provisions governing the creation, use, and replacement of the respective documents and registration plates are included. New rules governing demonstration plates will allow for better monitoring of their use and include payment of an annual fee by motor vehicle dealers. Part 3 outlines the construction and special features that are required for vehicles to be certified as fit to operate on the road. Most of these requirements are consistent with those that now exist, with certain parameters updated to be consistent with the features of vehicles now being manufactured. The maximum dimensions, including length, width, and height, as well as overhang limits, and the maximum wheelbase for different types of motor vehicles are also set out. Requirements on general maintenance provisions for the construction of the steering mechanism of motor vehicles and motorcycles, along with brakes and braking systems, are described. New provisions for tire safety and visibility through transparent material are also included, as well as environmental standards for noise and emissions from vehicles. Specific requirements for public passenger vehicles are further outlined, as these vehicles must undergo a special inspection to be deemed suitable for public transportation. Visibility of vehicles is reinforced through the provisions for reflectors and reflective material on large vehicles and for various lamps, including direction indicators or vehicles. Some of the specific new or modified provisions are as follows. The need for rear and side underrun protection devices for large trucks and trailers. The requirement to comply with motor vehicle exhaust emission standards. Descriptions of the different types of lamps and how they are required or permitted to be installed and used. Motor vehicles of model year 2024 or later should be operated with daytime running lamps. The circumstances under which revolving lamps, light bars, and spot lamps may be used. Guidance on the use of hazard lights and restrictions on the use of colored lights and warning devices. Mr. Speaker, the grant of special permits consistent with the current practice will allow vehicles that do not meet the requirements of the regulations to be operated on roads subject to any conditions set out in the special permit. Part 4 provides details with respect to the licensing of drivers, including the steps in the various application processes, the required documentation, the forms to be used, as well as the fees to be paid. The details concerning the renewal, suspension, revocation, and other related matters are also described in these regulations. Many of the processes remain as they currently exist. In respect of learner drivers, an applicant will now be required to produce a medical certificate, while the requirement to pass the road code test before being granted a learner's permit has already been implemented and has been in operation since January 2020. Motorcyclists driving with a learner's permit will need to be accompanied by an instructor who is driving another motorcycle within 6 meters of the learner driver. I take this opportunity to remind of the changes in the driver's license structure as set out in the RTA 2018, which classifies licenses as Class A motorcycles, Class B motor cars and trucks, not for commercial purposes, and the Class C operation of commercial motor vehicles. Some changes are made to the requirements to be met for the issuing of licenses, consistent with the new classifications, such as the theory and practical tests needed to satisfy the authority of the competence of the applicant to safely operate a vehicle. Specific requirements for Class C commercial driver's licenses are described, as well as the steps to be taken by the holder of a foreign driver's license. The treatment of an application for a person who is hearing impaired, including how the test should be administered and the requisite notation on the driver's license, if granted, are set out in this part. It also addresses what should happen if a holder of a driver's license becomes afflicted with a disease or disability that is likely to cause the driving by him or her of a motor vehicle, such as he or her is licensed to drive, to be a source of danger to the public, as well as the procedure that should be followed if his or her condition has changed for the better. In such an instance, a medical certificate completed by a registered medical practitioner will now be required for the renewal of a driver's license for any person who is 70 years or older, and these licenses will be valid for a period of 3 years. Further, provisions are included for demerit points on a driver's license to expire after 15 months, provided that less than 10 points are earned during such period. After a period of suspension, the points that led to the suspension will be expunged. The authority is also empowered to require specific training or retesting for persons whose driver's licenses have been suspended. Every learner's permit and driver's license is to be recorded in the driver's license register, and the required information is prescribed. The information to be included in the driver's offenses register is also set out. Part 5 of the regulations outlines requirements for driving instructors to become certified and the licensing of driving schools. This is a new activity which will be undertaken by the Island Traffic Authority. Therefore, all the provisions in this part are new, setting out what is required for permission to be granted to provide such services. A register of certified instructors and licensed schools will be kept by the authority. All driving instructors who are paid for their services will have to be so certified by the authority. And similarly, driving schools are to be duly licensed. Exceptions are made for certain circumstances under which certification is not required. Specifically, the requirement for a driving instructor certificate does not apply to a family member or friend teaching an individual to drive free of charge. The prerequisites for a person who wishes to be certified as a driving instructor include being at least 24 years of age, having not less than 24 months licensed driving experience, and successful completion of a driving instructor training program approved by the authority. Other conditions include character references, criminal record check, and any other security vetting and medical fitness. The authority has the discretion to certify an applicant or not. based on the information presented and obtained. In the case of refusal, the authority should advise the applicant of same in writing with reason and notify the applicant of his right under Section 44 of the Act to appeal to the tribunal. The certificate is to be valid for 5 years, but such certificate may be suspended or revoked under certain circumstances, which are outlined. In respect of the licensing of driving schools, a driving school requires a certified driving instructor as an owner, director, or partner, adequately equipped buildings to be used for classrooms, and an instructional program that meets or exceeds the standards established by the ITA, the Traffic Authority. Driving instructors and driving schools are required to operate within the stated guidelines and to keep records as set out in the regulations. Other requirements include the maintenance of adequate insurance and the operation of safe vehicles. A certificate of completion is to be issued to students which, under certain circumstances, may qualify the applicant exemption from aspects of testing by the ITA. Part 6, several additional provisions have been included to bring our legislation closer in line with the 1968 Vienna Convention on Road Traffic. The use of traffic control devices, as well as other restrictions on the use of the road to direct the actions and behavior of drivers are addressed. The different types and classes of traffic control devices and how they should be used on the road are outlined, with details of traffic signs set out in the 10th schedule. Provisions address damage or obstruction of traffic signs, whether deliberately or accidentally. Additionally, rules relating to pedestrian crossings are also included, with the mechanism for establishing and removing crossings being simplified and brought in line with current practice, and the addition of the 11th schedule to detail the locations. General rules about driving that have traditionally only been included in the road code are now embedded in the regulations, such as driving on the left, right-of-way rules at intersections, signals to be given when turning or slowing down, overtaking and other maneuvers, behavior at railway crossings, and prohibitions on parking. Safe operation of motorcycles and pedal cycles is targeted through specific provisions governing their use on roads, with the requisite protective gear. In addition to the prescribed helmet, motorcyclists will be required to wear a high visibility vest. Wheelchair use is also addressed, with these being permitted to operate on sidewalks and pavements. In addition to the current speed limit areas, including those for toll roads, provision is now made for school safety zones, in which the speed limit is 30 kilometers per hour, as well as areas with a 65 kilometer per hour speed limit. Implementation of these new speed limit provisions will be phased, and field work is now ongoing to identify, update, and finalize boundaries that are in the 12th schedule. Equipment is prescribed for measuring speed, for breath testing, and for investigation and reconstruction of motor vehicle collisions. Part 7. While electronic monitoring and surveillance is not yet in effect, the new regulations will allow for the remote detection of offences using cameras and other electronic devices. By the way, these are common practices in developed countries worldwide, using technology to monitor the roads and the issuing of tickets for such offences via electronic means, where traffic offences are detected remotely. The owner of the vehicle will receive the ticket. This is a regular practice now in developed countries, Mr. Speaker. Electronic detection devices will be approved by the authority to be installed on or near a road. Some of these devices are listed in the regulations, along with the types of offenses that may be detected, including speeding, disobeying traffic signals, and operating vehicles not being licensed, insured, or certified as fit. As the program is rolled out, the regulations will be adjusted to cover any additional devices or provisions that are necessary. Part 8. In Part 8, regulations relating to a motor vehicle in operation and restrictions on how a vehicle may be used on a road include noise standards, for which the levels are set out in the 8th schedule, matters related to the piloting and towing of vehicles, the manner in which persons, goods, or loads are to be carried, and the requirements for warning of protrusions beyond the vehicle. Certain vehicles, like large trucks, where they become stationary on a roadway, are required to display the prescribed emergency warning signs. Part 9. No significant changes are made to regulations for the control of vehicle loading, limits for the laden weight of vehicles, the permitted distribution of weight on the tires, and the mechanism by which vehicles may be weighed, which are all contained in Part 9. In Part 10, protective devices, whether imported or manufactured in Jamaica, are required to conform to specifications and approved standards as set out in the 13th schedule. An installation of these devices must be done in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. The Bureau of Standards is identified as the agency that tests and certifies protective devices. Every motor vehicle, motorcycle being sold or purchased will be required to include a helmet. Additionally, vehicles of model year 2024 or later, after April 1, 2024, must be fitted with an airbag. Mr. Speaker, I use this opportunity to once again remind motorists and motorcyclists of their personal responsibility of ensuring that they and their passengers are equipped with the necessary protective devices. Seat belts must be worn by all passengers and drivers in the front and back of vehicles, and motorcyclists must ensure that they and their passengers wear a helmet every time they go on a motorcycle. Part 11 is important that we all know the rules relating to the right of passage of an emergency vehicle on the roadway, and how other road users are to respond in such circumstances. The emergency vehicle is permitted to use lights and warning devices while executing various functions outlined, and drivers and pedestrians are to take action to allow the vehicle to pass. Tailgating an emergency vehicle is prohibited. Part 12 is another new section which incorporates the provisions of the United Nations recommendations on the transportation of dangerous goods and prohibits the transport of dangerous goods unless in compliance with this part. Anyone transporting dangerous substances must be suitably trained and qualified. However, exempt quantities are prescribed in the first schedule so an individual can get fuel for the lawnmower, cooking gas, etc. The duties of the owner, driver, consignor, and consignee are also outlined. A provision in Part 13 that speaks to the discharge of liability for offences set out in the 5th schedule is included in Part 13, whether by payment of a fixed penalty or as directed by a court. Provision is made for Form EC, which provides evidence by certificate of the person driving or using a motor vehicle when an offence involving said vehicle occurs and to whom the vehicle belongs. The part further repeals the road traffic regulations 1938 and other relevant regulations and provides savings and transitional procedures. The schedules to the regulations contain detailed information relating to various matters such as forms, specifications, and technical requirements, as well as the offences and penalties attached. The schedules are arranged as follows. First schedule, transportation of dangerous goods, includes the descriptions of different dangerous goods, their classes, and the quantities which a person is permitted to transport without specific training. The second schedule, visibility requirements for commercial motor vehicles, lights, markings, and reflectors required on commercial motor vehicles are contained in this schedule. In the third schedule, forms, fees, and driver's license requirements contains the content of forms, the list of various fees for services, and the requirements for different classes of driver's licenses. Fourth schedule has specifications for registration plates, describes the different plate colors and number letter arrangements for different vehicle types. In the fifth schedule, offenses and penalties, part sets out, part A sets out the offenses and the maximum applicable penalty for matters heard before the court, while Part B sets out the fixed penalty that may be paid at the tax office. In its requirements for braking performance, tables detail for different brake types, the stopping distance and deceleration rates required from varying initial speeds. That's under the 6th schedule. Under the 7th schedule, protection on vehicles describes the specification for mud guards and splash guards, as well as rear and side underrun protection devices on large trucks and trailers. The 8th Schedule, Environmental Standards, contains the emissions standards and the noise limits for motor vehicles. The 9th Schedule, Maximum Axle Loads, sets out in a tabular form the axle load limits for different configurations. In the 10th Schedule, Traffic Signs presents graphic and written description of road signs, road markings, and traffic signals, their meaning, and the action to be taken by drivers. In the 11th Schedule, pedestrian crossings, one-way roads, and bus lanes list the approved locations of pedestrian crossings, Part A, one-way streets, Part B, and bus lanes, Part C. The 12th Schedule, Speed Limits. Part A sets out the maximum speeds for different classes of vehicles in each type of specific limit areas. Part B will include the speed limit areas, 50 kilometers and 65 kilometers for all parishes. Part C contains the speed limit provisions for toll roads, and Part D contains details about school safety zones. The 13th Schedule, Restraint System Specifications and Standards, sets out the specifications and standards for restraint systems and protective devices, as well as the form of the certificate of exemption. I must thank all the persons who have played a part in the process of bringing the regulations, Mr. Speaker, to this point, especially the team from the Ministry of Transport and Mining, which led the collaborative effort that included participation of the Ministry of National Security, the Island Traffic Authority, the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the Tax Administration of Jamaica, the National Road Safety Council, and the Office of the Parliamentary Council, among others. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, once the regulations have passed the scrutiny of Parliament and are accepted for implementation, the Ministry is tasked with bringing the Road Traffic Act 2018 finally into force, which will repeal the Road Traffic Act of 1938. Given that certain institutional arrangements will have to be in place for the effective operation of some of the new provisions, not all sections of the RTA 2018 will be brought into operation immediately. The phased implementation plan will be finalized in conjunction with key stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, we all agree that the passing of these regulations is crucial to the effective regulation of the use of our roads. It is critical to the government's agenda of establishing and maintaining order and discipline to reduce road traffic crashes and fatalities, as well as advancing our economy. And I should say, Mr. Speaker, as I wrap up, that last week I attended a road safety conference at the United Nations in New York, their headquarters. And it is generally accepted that over the next 10 years, the target internationally is for us to see reduction in road accidents cut by 50% over the next 10 years. Enforcement of these regulations, once brought into force, will require each person to be accountable for his or her road behavior. While the government has an obligation to its people to provide safe and reliable roads, it is absolutely necessary that road user behavior must change, and this must be supported by strong and sustained enforcement of legislation and public awareness. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica is on the path to a road safety revolution, and we, as the government, must remain steadfast in our efforts to make Jamaica the standard by which our neighboring countries and the world operates. Mr. Speaker, since 2012, we have seen a steady increase in road fatalities in Jamaica. It has to turn around. I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, let me start out by saying that the opposition supports the Road Traffic Regulations 2022. But while supporting it, I want to just make a few key points, observations, because there's a better late than never that we have been waiting this long for the regulations. And it is an indication of how not to do something good, but do it in a bad way. Because the first tabling of the amended Road Traffic Act was actually in 2015, was retabled in 2018. And we've been waiting since 2018, now in 2022, to pass the regulations when the full sum of the Road Traffic Act itself could not come into being until these regulations have been passed. So, and we, all of us collectively in the House, have to take some responsibility for it. But while we table these regulations, Mr. Speaker, and we speak of all the things that should be done, the wearing of helmets, the wearing of seat belts, we are now including the electronic monitoring. But I just want to make the point on the wearing of helmets and seat belts and other aspects of the regulations itself to do with speed. And in essence, we would like to see the reduction in road fatalities. But again, without proper enforcement. This here regulations and the Road Traffic Act itself basically come to zero. Because I saw some data from the Ministry of Health. There's one parish that out of every 5 fatalities, road fatalities, 3 come from someone riding a motorcycle. And we have for years have had in our regulations, in our laws, the wearing of helmets and the wearing of seat belts. But yet still, there are persons out there who are riding motorcycles and also driving motor vehicles, exceeding the speed without any enforcement being done. So, Minister, with all good intentions, without enforcement, these road traffic regulations and the act itself that many man-hours have been spent on will basically come to zero. But I want to also speak about the public education, because it is my disappointment, Minister, because we from 2018, I remember speaking in a sectoral presentation, from 2018, when we had already passed the act itself, that we should have started some public education, because these regulations and the Act itself, there are quite a bit of fundamental changes that are being made. We're talking about prosecuting someone for using their cell phone while driving. Yeah, that's a big one, right? You're now talking about electronic surveillance. That is new in itself. There are quite a bit of increase in fines within the regulations and the Act itself that are going to be new. And seeing that we had such a long delay in bringing the regulations and now passing it, that some public education should have started by then, so that once the Act come into being, the public themselves would at least be cognizant of the changes that are being made. So that for me has been a disappointment that we have not started that yet. But I'm sure that a full public education campaign will be done, before all these have come into being. The issue of the Section 46(4) speaks of a owner of a motor vehicle shall ensure that the silencer, muffler, expansion, and other contrivances referred to in the paragraph speaks about noise, especially those motorcycles where the silencers have been removed from these motorcycles. Again, it comes down to enforcement, because already we have in previous legislations about the noise, the decibel meters being used, and it is also in these regulations. But you have also wholesalers and distributors bringing in these mufflers and also selling them. So even if the road traffic regulations speak about them, not removing all the silencers and things, but you have individuals bringing them through the port. So it should be an offense to sell them. And again, Minister, I am going to, you and I have had the conversation. It may be unpopular in what I'm going to say, but it's something that I think that if we're going to deal with the whole matter of road safety, if an individual is going to purchase even a used car, they ought to at least have it insured and licensed before taking it out onto the streets. Persons purchasing a motorcycle now can go to a wholesale. They drive through Porus now, they're right there at hardwares selling them. So somebody bought a motorcycle without even being able to ride it, even though the new Road Traffic Act itself and the regulation speaks about someone riding a motorcycle now has to be licensed. But it doesn't speak about them having to have a license first before purchasing a motorcycle. So again, there's some disconnect with the regulations and the actual, how it is, the realities out there on the streets. So we on the side, Minister, as I said, we support it. We support the regulations. It has been long in coming. There's a section in here, Minister, which I would like you also to set Part C, which deal with bus lanes. And this one only speaks to the Washington Boulevard, on the third lane being a bus lane. But I would like the Minister to take into consideration with what is happening now, especially with the JUTC and the congestion basically on that Washington Boulevard. Is it still relevant in 2022? So we welcome the regulations, and we We would love to see, as I mentioned, a fulsome public education campaign starting immediately in dealing with the changes, especially these major changes that will impact the general public and motorists, especially the motorists, those who are driving. But the section that deal with also, Minister, with the electronic surveillance, because even now at our intersections there are cameras that are linked back to the NWA and Jamaica Eye. And again, if we are not going to use them for traffic management also, then the regulations still is not going to be impactful in traffic management and for saving lives. Saving lives also, Minister, because I know that we are over 250 road fatalities already this year. But it is not only the regulations, it has to do with our road surfaces. It has to do with your road furnishings, your stop signs, because we have data. The ministry itself has data on those hot spots. What are we doing about those hot spots outside of just passing the regulations and speaking about it? But action needs to be taken in dealing with those hot spots and the weaknesses, be it road surfaces or other instances in dealing with how it is that we approach road fatalities and the saving of lives. So, if it pleases you, Mr. Speaker, we welcome the regulations.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to briefly add my strong support to the point made by the member from Northwest Manchester regarding the element of public education. I have been served on the Joint Select Committee that considered this bill prior to 2016. And it was clear during the deliberations that because of the extensive changes that would come in the new act, it was imperative that a massive public education program be put in place. And to do so, not in a kind of hit and miss way, but substantial and extended. It involves significant changes in penalties. It involves new offenses that never existed before. Many of them the minister pointed out in his presentation this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, we don't want to unreasonably make criminals out of people. We can't expect much of our driving public to be aware of these changes, though they exist in fact in law. It is a responsibility of government to adequately inform the citizens so that they can be aware. And yes, one will argue that you can go to court and there are certain provisions in law that you can use as plausible defense. But every person that has to go to court to defend these offense breaches have to incur costs, engage lawyers to represent them, and not to mention the loss of time spent in the courts trying to deal with these matters. So I plead to the minister, make this a priority. I would believe that before the act comes in effect, a minimum of 3 months public education campaign should be in place. A minimum of 3 months before the act actually comes in place. Next point, Mr. Speaker, that I think is critically important. We want to avoid, as much as possible, discretion on the part of the police officers with motorists on the road. We need to make sure that the infrastructure for testing to affirm or deny any breach having taken place with a motor vehicle is in place. We need to make sure that the equipment that might be needed along the roadway from time to time to establish a breach as having taken place. For example, the police will have a speedometer, and they will show to the driver, this is what we're doing. Well, granted, other issues regarding that, whether it's working good or not, that's a separate issue. But other breaches such as emissions, noise, right? We don't want a police to say it sounds too loud, or it look like it's too much smoke, and therefore you get a ticket and you have to go before. There must be some means of instantaneously establish breaches as having taken place in instances like those before somebody is all before the courts or out of just can't bother, pay the fine and go on. The state cannot impose these onerous situations on our citizens. We don't want the truly innocent persons to be penalized. Not at all. And so, Mr. Minister, I am asking you, pleading to you, that steps along this line be considered and implemented before the act comes into place. Thank you much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, somehow I feel a little like a father who has seen his child grown up. Having worked in the ministry and tabled the first bill here in the House, went through the Joint Select Committee, tabled in April 2014, spent 18 months in the Joint Select Committee, and on Tuesday, November 7th, it was passed, 2015 was passed in the lower house. Went to the upper house, but the elections intervened, and in 2016, and was not passed there to be assented. Came back to the house in latter part of 2016 again. And why I mention that chronology, Mr. Speaker, is that in the 2016 debate, I spoke about the need for the then minister in looking at the regulations to have something that deals with electronic surveillance of infractions on the road. And if you'll allow me, Mr. Speaker, I'll read a section from the JIS newsletter which reported that particular debate in the Parliament. It said, meanwhile, Guy cited the need for legislation to be introduced to facilitate electronic monitoring of the nation's roadway through installation of speeding and intersection cameras. Minister, I'm very happy that today the regulations speak to the need and the use for those measures to prevent persons who break the law. Because you will not have a policeman at every intersection. You will not have somebody who people will look up to and recognize that if they break the law, they'll be given a ticket or a fine. So that the introduction of this electronic detection device, as indicated in section 237 to 247 of the regulations, is very timely. And I too will support the view of the member for St. Catherine South, who spoke to the need for a very exhaustive public relations campaign so that people, the citizens of this country, can be advised of what the new regulations are and what it is to create an infraction under the law. Minister, the member from Manchester Northwest spoke about the silencers on vehicles, but particularly the motorbikes. One night, Minister, at 10 minutes after 10, a constituent sent me a WhatsApp and said, MP, what can you do about the bikes that making all this noise on the Highgate Road? And I said, well, it is in the regulations to come, but until it is passed here and in the Senate, it will not be law and it cannot be enforced. I'm happy that we have taken the step today, Minister, to have that done. And secondly, you will recall that in the constituency debates of last year, in September, I spoke also about the nuisance that these bikes are causing on the road for peaceful existence of people in their homes, in their communities. You hear this blaring of the noise, and I want to concur with my member here from Northwest that the police need to be armed with the devices to be able to say what decibel level, what smoke emission is coming from it. So it's not a subjective thing, but quite objective. So, Minister, as I said, I feel very happy today that we are taking that step so that our nation's road and our nation's pedestrian, our nation's users of the road can be safer if these regulations are promulgated and acted on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Members, I wanted to just firstly to commend my colleague for moving on this very important piece of legislation. And of course, there's agreement on all sides as it relates to its validity and currency. I want to take the public health perspective because oftentimes we do not consider how these laws, rules, policies connect in terms of solving not just one problem, but solving multiple and related problems. And I spoke to it recently, particularly around the motorcycle accidents that we have to confront in the country and its impact on the public health infrastructure, not to mention the impact on individuals, families, and by extension communities. And I actually was in the parish of Westmoreland speaking at an event. But a few weeks before that, I had the opportunity, Minister, to tour the Sablamar Hospital, and in particular the surgical wards, and in particular the male surgical ward, about 30 beds, 80% of which were occupied by recovering motorcycle accident victims. And I made it a point of duty to walk from bed to bed to interview or just have a talk with each of them. Some interesting statistics came out of that anecdotal experience that is quite telling. For starters, none of them was in the hospital for less than 3 weeks. In some instances, up to 3 months, either because of the severity of their injury, or they were waiting on the pins and the implants to put their limbs back together. There was one youngster there, schooler, 15 years old, who was on a bike, not the only one, pillion rider, and had broken bones in several places, out of school for a while, and basically was in the hospital, I think, about 5 months. The other interesting fact is that everyone that I asked, what happened and who was at fault, it is never their fault. It is somebody else's fault. A large percentage of them were motorcycles colliding with each other. One bike hitting up into another bike with multiple casualties because of the numbers on the back of the motorcycle. And the final observation is that 99.9% did not wear a helmet. And when you ask them why, they say that it's a nuisance. It interferes with their capacity to maneuver. Clearly, the opposite is true. I've been to other countries where I've seen these laws enforced, where you cannot have a motorcycle, Mr. Speaker, where sometimes 2 helmets are not there. One on the side, just in case you have to carry someone, one, of course, on the head of the person who's riding. And I really want to firstly say that this is a relevant piece of legislation. It is timely, it is long overdue, and I want to share the concern of my colleagues to my opposite, because I think it's a valid concern, and I'm sure it's your concern too, Minister, and that is on the enforcement side, because the law means nothing if we can't enforce it. And I think it's a national challenge and crisis, but it is particularly strong in certain parishes. And I mean the parish of Westmoreland, the parish of St. Elizabeth. Lovely people, many going about their business, many trying to work. Sometimes necessity created out of circumstances. So the concept of the bike taxi, I don't know if any of you have ever seen a motorcycle with 5 people on it or 4 people on it, because it has become the mode of transportation to bring people into the community, and people pay as a service. Well, that's very common in a parish like Westmoreland. And nobody with a helmet, and sometimes children, very young children. So I really think that the time has come for us to, one, educate the public, secondly, to enforce the law, and hopefully from that to ease the burden on individuals, but also, as I say, from a Ministry of Health perspective, from the perspective of the public health response, because if you have 80% of your beds being occupied for 3 weeks and a month and 2 months, then where will you have time to do anything else? And I think those circumstances need to be understood. So thank you, Minister. I wanted to elaborate here. It's something I've spoken to publicly, and I'm happy to work with you in whatever way, shape or form as part of both the prevention mechanism and also part of the enforcement, along with security, of course. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker. Yeah, let's go ahead. Yeah. Just wanted to add my personal support to the passage of these regulations. I think, as the member from Central St. Mary's indicated, it's been a long time coming. And I know it's not been an easy road. There are very substantial regulations. They will have taken some time to develop. But because of the public health impact of breaches of road safety and the impact on the economy and on family life and so on of bad car crashes and fatalities in particular, this is a priority piece of legislation, I think, for any administration. As has been said, we brought it in 2015 to the House. It was passed, I think, in November. Came to the Senate, then the election was called. The Parliament was dissolved. It was brought again in 2016, I think. 2016, I think. And then, but passed 2018. And now, 4 years later, we have these regulations. And your presentation indicates that the regulations will enable parts of the Act to be brought into effect, but there are still some institutional arrangements that need to be put in place before the entirety of the Act can be brought into effect. And so one issue that arises is when you do bring in those parts of the Act into effect, there needs to be clear public information at that time as to which sections are and which sections are not, because that will be of significance to persons who want to know what the rules are that they have to comply with. I want to say that the road safety issue is a real national crisis. The data, I've been just checking online, the data shows that in last year, 2021, we had 484 road fatalities. That's the highest number since this millennium began. And the year before that, 2020, we were at 444, which was itself significantly higher than and during COVID, when many people were not that active. So we have a real problem. When I was in government and part of the National Road Safety Council meetings, because as you know, the Prime Minister chairs the National Road Safety Council, and my late father actually started the National Road Safety Council and was its first president. Prior to the seatbelt law being brought in. Now, at that time, when we were in government, the objective was to get road fatalities below 300 per year and to keep them there. And in fact, that was achieved in one of the 4 years that we were in government. I think there was 1 year we were at 285. But it has not, Jamaica has been unable to maintain that. And this is, I think, something which we have to work across the aisle to deal with. It's not a party political issue. It's a national issue which we have to try and improve our performance on. So when you speak to Jamaica being on the road towards a road safety revolution, I hope that is true. Merely passing the regulations won't achieve it, as important as that is. Because if people don't understand what are in the regulations, they won't be able to comply with them, which reinforces the importance of the points that have been made about a serious public education campaign in the run-up to bringing the new Road Traffic Act into effect, so that motorists know the do's and don'ts under the new regime, especially around cell phone use, for example, when driving, which anecdotally I think most of us would say is a major problem. I mean, you see people texting and driving, and routinely talking and driving, and you see the way they drive changes while they're on the phone. And this is why the new law will prohibit that. But people need to be aware of those requirements. And some of the other issues that the member from North West Manchester mentioned about, for example, ensuring that these devices with mufflers, that the extractors and so on, that facilitate exhaust, motorbike exhaust being like gunshots, that is something we need to put an end to. I think that kind of thing just contributes to the overall social malaise of the country and the sort of acceptance of violence as part of our daily life, because those noises that the bikes make are, I think, deliberately made and are similar to the sound of gunfire. So we need to, as part of making our society more civil, we need to change that type of activity on the road. So it will have our full support, but we really think public education is going to be critical, and I look forward to you, as a man who's known for marketing, putting some effort behind that to ensure that the public knows what's coming and they're not taken by surprise when a police officer next stops them and says, you know what, you have a big ticket coming your way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, let me follow up on a few points that Leader of Opposition made, which is that, and really, the point is well made. The point is well made that this has been long in coming. But I've sort of leafed through it, the regulation, to see if an aspect of our economic arrangements are addressed in these regulations. And why it is clear to me that the focus has been, and properly so, on the health impact, the safety concerns in the regulation. But there's an aspect to the road use and the safety, the transportation safety, and broader road use, which is economic enablement as well. And I want to bring to your attention something that I raised when the Act was brought the first time, which is that the regulation impacts negatively in some instances and have the potential to enable international trade, because it is the last mile of the international trade that affects the domestic economy, and the regulation does not speak to it. So there's an aspect of economic enablement and economic regulation that is not focused on and given any attention to in these regulations. So, for example, you have in international trade a whole issue about how tractor trailers, those are the chassis that are not ordinary chassis. They only are used by when you move containers off the port. And when those are used, there are a number of issues currently that are not addressed adequately or at all in the regulations. And so those persons involved in that business will tell you that they are subjected to police stopping and fees and charges made and fines imposed in a way that adds to the total cost or the landed cost of goods in Jamaica. Persons are aware of it. It needs to be addressed because, especially at a time when we are talking about implementing the logistic hub, it's an important aspect of that economic regulation. And it needs attention, needs to be given to it. And I've seen, as I've glanced through the regulation, it is not here. And I'm pleased that there's more to come, therefore. And I think we have the opportunity at that time to focus on the remaining aspects of it so that the regulations are not just safety focused, but that they are economically enabling as well. But it's an important part of what needs to be done. Yeah.
I just want to make one point, because I know that with this new law and regulations, we're going to be seeing the increased use of technology, which will assist us both in traffic management and in crime fighting, I hope. And I am really hoping that both yourself and the Minister of National Security is going to coordinate to get this Jamaica eye moving. But Minister, I want to commend to you the idea that we need to apply greater sense into some of the traffic management techniques and rules. And for example, just one example, I travel on the north-south highway, and I really believe that it is ridiculous for you to have a maximum speed of 80 kilometers per hour on that highway, especially when there are stretches that, if you really consider it sensibly, can accommodate a greater speed. And sometimes I suspect people are forced to break the law. And I'm suggesting, well, yes, when you have a good surface. And I would like to look everyone in the face inside here and ask you, have you ever driven more than 80 kilometers per hour on the north-south highway? I think we need to review these speed limits and try to make them as sensible as possible. I commend that to your thinking.
Speaker, would you allow me to address this Parliament from a seat that's not my own? Thank you. So I sat here and we were speaking about road traffic accidents. I represent the constituency of Westmoreland and Western, which has a lot of road traffic accidents. In fact, Westmoreland is known as the bikers parish because we have a lot of bikers. And that is just a result of, so the persons and citizens would have sought to use motorcycles instead of using their motor cars. So it evolved out of a necessity for transportation. So now we have persons, 5, 6 persons riding on one motorcycle, which is highly unsafe. So I hear the discussion about road safety, and I am purged, and there is an impetus to stand up and say something about it, because as a newly elected member of Parliament, I face several challenges. Persons use motorcycle to generate an income to send their kids to school. And when there's a motor vehicle or a motorcycle accident, there's 2 challenges that emerges. One, the parent cannot send their children to school, they cannot provide for their homes. And the second is that they don't have the resources to take care of themselves in the hospital. And I've called the Minister of Health on several occasions for constituents who need replacement hips, replacement knees. I have constituents who are in the hospital now for 6 months. And all of these incidences could have been avoided if there was correct protective gear being used. Now, when you have a parent, like, for example, I know this particular individual, he has been a motorcycle operator for almost 15 years in Negril. He has 4 kids. A car came and hit him down, and he's now incapacitated. His kids now have to
basically, they lived with him. The mother is overseas. His kids now have to live with their grandmother. So it poses a lot of social challenges because now we have 4 kids who are without parenting and without guidance. And that particular individual, who I know quite well, I have to do what I can in my capacity as an MP to support, his speedy recovery. So there are 2 things that I want to mention that I support any bill or any law that will help support the motorcyclists in Westmoreland. In particular, we have motorcycle training that was implemented with the Road Safety Unit in Grangeville. However, we don't have the same level of enthusiasm to wear helmets. And it's for some simple, basic reasons. And I think when helmets were designed, they weren't designed for Rastafarians. So the guys who are Rasta who want to put on a helmet, it just don't work. So they said, MP, we can't wear a helmet with our locks here. That don't make sense. And for most of our laws weren't structured for motorcycle operating as a taxi. So when you have a young lady with a beautiful hairdo that they spend thousands of dollars for, and they're taking a motorcycle home, they don't want to put on a helmet because it's going to ruin their hairdo. And those are just 2 examples of the social challenges that we're having with persons wearing protective gear. So despite having the training center in Grangeville, we still have this enormous social and cultural challenge of getting persons to actually wear the protective gear. And I just want to mention one particular entity, FIA Foundation, which I think Minister Green will speak more on. FIA Foundation came to Jamaica and they're looking at motorcycle accidents and what can be done to reduce the incidences of these accidents. And they came to Westmoreland and we did a survey, and I'm looking forward to a program that will help to address this in my own space and constituency. And I am quite pleased to see that we have some level of unity of concern over motor vehicle accidents across the floor. And I'm hoping that we'll also have unity of action when the time is right. Because as I said, in Westmoreland, it's a cultural and a social issue, and it impacts our economy quite significantly because they do use motorcycle to generate an income for their families. So those are my comments, Speaker and Minister. I thank you for this bill, and I hope we can work together, because as time evolves, we'll find that some of our laws may need to change, because this hairstyle thing is a thing that we really have to take into consideration, because the women won't wear a helmet. And then there's also another issue that emerged during Corona, where they're saying, who's going to sanitize the helmet each time a passenger gets off the bike? It becomes unsanitary to just keep handing a helmet to each person that comes on, that puts over your head and over your face. So there are certain challenges that emerge culturally that we will have to address, and I'm willing to work with your Minister and Minister Green to ensure we get some laws that are appropriate and culturally accepted by our locals. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, first let me commend Minister Shaw and the Ministry of Transport and the entire team, and clearly I will single out the National Road Safety Council, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, the Vice Chairman being Dr. Lucian Jones, and our Executive Director being Paula Fletcher. I also mention Earl Jarrett and other persons who have really given of themselves in voluntary service to treat with the issue of road safety. As mentioned before, the National Road Safety Council is still functional and operational. It falls under the office of the Prime Minister, and in fact, we're set to have our next National Road Safety Council meeting on Thursday of this week, which will be chaired by the Prime Minister. So the timing, Minister Shaw, is exceptional, because one of the things that the Council has been advocating for is for these regulations to come into play. So I'm very happy to see that, one, there is support across the aisles for the regulation, and I do hope that that support will also be brought to bear outside of this House, and that we will have a truly all hands on deck approach as we treat with the issue of road safety. The leader of the opposition did highlight the figures in relation to last year of 484 deaths on our roads from motor vehicle crashes. Of that number, Mr. Speaker, 34%, 164 deaths were in relation to motorcycle crashes. What we've seen over the last decade is that the rise in the number of fatalities is directly linked to the rise in the increase in motorcycle crashes, and clearly the rise in the ownership of motorcycles, right across the country. So, Minister, the sections of the regulations that treat with the sale of a motorcycle to be accompanied by a helmet under law is a significant step in the right direction, because clearly motorcycles are accessible. They are a very popular means of transportation in the western side of the country, especially Westmoreland, St. Elizabeth. But now the stipulation that puts a requirement on those who sell motorcycles is a very important step. And I'm very happy that we're taking that step in this regulation. The other thing, Minister Shaw, which I think is a step in the right direction, is in the regulations. 269(4) in the regulation puts a requirement that the motorcycle is to be sold with a helmet. Very, very, very good step. The other significant move is introducing standards for helmets. Because prior to now, one of the challenges is even when people wear helmets, there were no standards, Minister. So the regulations that now introduce that the helmets have to be tested by the Bureau, they have to subscribe to a certain standard, because if you're wearing a helmet that's ineffective, then it really does not provide the level of protection. So I want to commend you and the team, Minister, just to say that we recognize as a government that it will take an all-hands-on-deck approach, and that the Office of the Prime Minister will be working along with the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Health and the National Road Safety Council to tackle especially the issue of motorcycle crashes. And we were successful in applying for a grant, the National Road Safety Council, of €750,000 that will be directed towards, over the next 3 years, treating with the issue of motorcycle crashes. We're going to look at a more detailed survey to look at some of the cultural issues, and we're then going to go into how we can also help provide helmets for people who are unable to afford helmets, and how we can provide training in relation to defensive riding techniques for those who operate motorcycles. So this is a big step in the right direction, Minister, and you have the full support of the government, and I know you have the full support of the opposition.
Minister.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And let me thank everyone, both on the opposition and government sides, for your contributions to this very important matter that is before us. I'd just like to say that, having such a long gestation period from as far back as 1914 and 2014, and representing both sides, right? And after listening to all of you today, I think that we have an opportunity here to make it even more perfect, right? And so I want to publicly ask my Chief Technical Director, who is here with us, I want a transcript of what everyone has said. We're going to look very carefully at it to see what amendments can be made within this transitional period that we're going to have, as you know, and which will incorporate proper public education as well, that has been mentioned, and I totally agree with you. So I just want you to know that I'm taking your contributions seriously, and that's why I'm giving my Chief Technical Director the instruction to let's get those, go through every point that has been raised, and see how we can move closer to perfection on this matter. Because this is not a political matter at all. This is a matter for the safety of the people of Jamaica. So I just want to thank all of you for your contributions, and now ask Mr. Speaker for the final approval of this bill.
The question is that the motion be approved. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, the second matter that I wish to bring to the Honorable House has to do with the Road Traffic Amendment Act, which was tabled and for which I gave notice for second reading shortly. And I would like to move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of the bill and to take it through its concluding stages.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, thank you. Yeah. The bill is cited as the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2022, and this is really making minor amendments to the Road Traffic Act 2018 in order to facilitate the accurate implementation of the road traffic regulations. So, as you're aware, the Road Traffic Act 2018 received the Governor General's assent in December of that year. Consequent on the passage into law, the technical team in the ministry, whilst carrying out further review of the road traffic regulations, identified the areas needing amendment as presented here today. Mr. Speaker, the RTB 2022 makes amendments to 9 sections and 1 schedule. The bill is cited as the Road Traffic Amendment Act 2022 and is to be read and construed as one with the Road Traffic Act 2018 and all amendments thereto. The provisions of the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2022 are as follows. The expansion of the definition of motorcycles to include any other vehicle so constructed to be steered by handlebars with the driver sitting astride. In other words, it will incorporate like a 3-wheel type of unit, right? And astride the vehicle with an unladen weight not exceeding 400 kgs. And other minor amendments to substitute words with more accurate ones, or replacing words with the correct reference. For example, in section 110.1.1, by deleting the word cylindrical and substituting therefore the word cylinder. And in the 5th schedule, section 5, subsection 5, by inserting a specimen of breath to replace a specimen of blood. And so, Mr. Speaker, I lay before the House today the bill cited as the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2022 that supports the Road Traffic Act 2018 passed by this House.
Mr. Speaker, I think it goes without saying that the bill is uncontroversial and it's really just a tidying up exercise. The one thing I would say is that included among its provisions are several which are of a nature that ought to be taken care of in the law revision process. That is the work of the law revision commissioners to fix typographical errors and so on in acts that have been passed by Parliament, so that we don't have to go through new legislation to fix things like changing a comma or something that is not in any way affecting the meaning, where it's clear what the meaning is, but where it's more of a typographical nature. I'm not sure what's happening with the law revision process. The Minister of Justice is here, and maybe he could give us an indication as to that. But some of these amendments are really things that the law revision process ought to take care of. But having said that, there are some other things which couldn't have been addressed in that way and would have to have been fixed. And you have taken the opportunity to fix them here, and it's timely that you're doing so in tandem with the regulations, and it has our support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and thanks for your comments. So, Mr. Speaker, I beg now for the bill to be read a second time.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Road Traffic Act 2018 read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Those against?
Mr. Speaker, can I suggest that you just put all of them on block, please, if it's possible?
I put clause 1 to 11, all in block. Those in favor? Those against? I put the title enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. The question that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without any amendment, with any amendment. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the bill be read a third time.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Road Traffic Act 2018 read a third time and passed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the issue of the amendments to the Transport Authority Act. I had laid this before the House, and the bill is cited as the Transport Authority Amendment Bill 2022. This Honourable House will recall that the Transport Authority Act 1987 was to be amended to include, with modifications, sections 61 to 89, Part 3, Regulation of Public Passenger Vehicles and Road Licenses, and Part 4, Regulation of Commercial Motor Vehicles of the Road Traffic Act 1938. The Transport Authority, in accordance with Section 4 of the Transport Authority Act 1987, has been empowered to regulate and monitor public passenger transport throughout the island, and to perform such duties as immediately prior to the 8th day of July 1987 were required to be performed by A, the licensing authorities or specially constituted licensing authorities under the Road Traffic Act, B, the Public Passenger Transport Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region Board of Control constituted under the Public Passenger Transport Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region Act, and C, the Public Passenger Transport Rural Area Board of Control constituted under the Public Passenger Transport Rural Area Act. The provisions of the Public Passenger Transport KMTR and the Public Passenger Transport for the rural areas are similar, as they both provide for the grant of exclusive and market service licenses, the monitoring and regulation of public passenger transport services provided under such licenses, and the establishment of boards of control, with the exception that the former applies to the Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region, KMTR, while the latter applies to the rural areas outside of the KMTR. The bill also incorporates a modified version of provisions now included in the Public Passenger Transport Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region Act 1947 and the Public Passenger Transport Rural Area Act 1970, and thereafter the repeal of those two acts. The Transport Authority Amendment Bill also incorporates sections 61 to 89, Part 3, Regulation of Public Passenger Vehicles and Road Licenses, and Part 4, Regulation of Commercial Motor Cars of the Road Traffic Act 1938, with modifications. The modifications made are in order to address duplications, ensure cohesiveness, and appropriately empower the Transport Authority to execute its responsibilities. The amendments reflect current trends in the public transport sector and will address the indiscipline and corruption in the public passenger transport sector by strengthening the administrative framework and increasing the penalties. Mr. Speaker, this bill contains 22 sections grouped into 6 parts, with each section highlighting provisions for the better administration of the public passenger transport sector. In addition, various elements of the sections are expounded on in 5 schedules providing details for implementation. The provisions of the Act are as follows. The preliminary, or Part 1 of the bill, introduces the bill, citing it as the Transport Authority Amendment Act 2022, while Part 2 addresses all the proposed amendments to the Principal Act, including revised definitions of key terms, new provisions covering the PPT KMTR and the PPT rural area and sections 61 to 89 of the RTA 1938, and other amendments as needed, including the duties and powers of inspectors and the police, forfeiture of seized vehicles, how motor vehicles are to be sold, legal professional privilege, offenses of public passengers, and the protection of officers of the authority. Under Part 3, a new section called Road Licenses is outlined, improving the process of obtaining and renewing the road license by providing for 1 or 4-year road licenses and changing the date of expiry to, in the case of an individual, on the birthday of the holder of the license, while in the case of a company, on the anniversary date of its incorporation. So the choice would be there for 1 year or 4 years. And I think will be a helpful issue. Conductors' licenses and badges are also prescribed in this section. The bill further speaks to exclusive licenses and market service licenses under Part 4, incorporating provisions from the PPT KMTR 1947 and the PPT Rural Area 1970, with language that has been modernized from what was in both the 1947 and the 1970 bills. Part 5, which addresses commercial carriers, incorporates provisions from the RTA 1938 with language that has been modernized from what was in the RTA of 1938. Provision is made for the carrier license duration of 1 or 4 years and changing the date of expiry to be, in the case of an individual, on the birthday of the holder of the license, while in the case of a company, on the anniversary date of its incorporation, as I had mentioned before. The Constitution and procedure of a public transport appeal tribunal is outlined under Part 6, which speaks to the appeals tribunal and its procedures. A fixed penalties scheme has been introduced, as set out in the 4th schedule, itemizing the offences and penalties, in respect of which liability may be discharged on payment of a fixed penalty, so that tickets can be issued to offenders instead of bringing all matters before the courts. All the fixed penalties have been reviewed and the sums increased to strengthen the administrative framework. This part also speaks to a new provision providing for non-exemption of liability under the RTA 2018 or any other law. So, Mr. Speaker, we all can agree that this bill, cited as the Transport Authority Amendment Act 2022, is a crucial one for the regulation and monitoring of public passenger transport throughout the island. It is critical to the government's agenda of establishing and maintaining order and discipline in the public transport sector, and will serve to effectively assist in advancing our economy. I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, it is my understanding that there is agreement that we would not conclude this debate today, but to allow the opposition spokesman on transport some more time, and we'll do it when we resume at a later time.
Mr. Speaker, we will allow until the next sitting of the House. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the suspension of this debate at this time.
The question before us is that this matter be suspended until further notice. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now ask for the recommittal of item statements by ministers. Thank you.
The question is that the item statement by minister be recommitted. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, the world is facing challenging times. Mr. Speaker, my namesake, Mr. Speaker, how could I? How could I? I saw the smile and I said, wait, what? Mr. Speaker, the world is facing challenging times. After enduring 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is the worst pandemic in 100 years, and the historic economic contraction it induced around the world, the world now faces the highest levels of global inflation in 40 years. Supply chain pressures related to the dynamics of COVID-19 had a negative impact on prices towards the latter half of 2021. This has been seriously compounded by the war in Ukraine, which began earlier this year. So even as we celebrate 8.2% GDP growth for 21-22, which was released by Saturn yesterday, which represents a strong start to our recovery, and as unemployment at 6.2% is at a historic record low. We need to ensure that we continue to provide protection for the most vulnerable and those impacted by global conditions who are least able to absorb these shocks. In my closed budget presentation in March, I announced $3.5 billion of measures to alleviate the impact of these conditions, and these measures included $800 million to provide assistance to public transport operators as a means of protecting the substantial number of Jamaicans who depend on public transportation. Of this amount, $200 million is by way of loan through the DBJ through microfinance institutions. I had announced $750 million for a food assistance program targeting 75,000 persons to be executed by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, partnering with NGOs and through the Constituency Development Fund and the municipal corporations. $152 million for an increase in allocation towards transportation assistance to students on path, and approximately $2 billion to the GOJ Energy Copay, where the Government of Jamaica would contribute 20% of the JPS bill for all postpaid households that consume 200 kilowatts of electricity or less per month over the 4-month period April to July 2022, as well as $3,000 per month over the same period per month for prepaid residential customers. Just by way of updating the House, Madam Speaker, on these initiatives, the GOJ Energy Copay has commenced. In April, 474,550 postpaid residential customers who consumed less than 200 kilowatts had the Government of Jamaica contribute 20% of their bill for a total cost of approximately $500 million. This was reflected in May bills. In addition, Madam Speaker, 9,235 prepaid customers received $3,000 in electricity payment support, also paid in May. With respect to the May bill, 478,461 residential customers who consume less than 200 kilowatts in the month of May had the government contribute, or the government contributed 20% of their bill for a total cost of $533 million. And this was reflected in June bills. In addition, 9,773 prepaid customers received $3,000 in electricity payment support in June. Madam Speaker, applications opened for the $25,000 PPV operators / transport operators grant on the 20th of June. We have so far received 3,000 applications, and payments will commence in 2 weeks for applicants verified as having duly paid up PPV licenses. I encourage those PPV operators, licensees, who have not yet signed up to do so. Applications or opportunities to sign up will be accepted until the end of August. Madam Speaker, the $200 million loan scheme for taxi operators is now in effect, and it's available through microfinance institutions. Loan proceeds can be used for the acquisition of spare parts, batteries, tires, and repairs. The DBJ is coordinating the program, but the access to the resources are available through microfinance institutions which dot the entire landscape of Jamaica. Madam Speaker, the government also collaborated with leading non-governmental organizations through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security with the intention of providing $200 million of social assistance relief to communities island-wide. The results of this so far are that not all of this amount has yet been paid up. I believe amounts totaling $165.6 million have been submitted by these NGOs, which would mean which means over 16,000 individuals. And of this amount, 100 million has been paid out, or 99.3 million has been paid out for approximately 9,900 individuals via a We Pay electronic platform. There have been issues with, TRN lining up with actual, and the NGOs, while members of parliament are used to providing this information, we have less error rates. We've found a high degree of error rates with the NGOs. But it can't be said that we have not tried to use different channels to get support to needy Jamaicans. Madam Speaker, the government is working to alleviate the impact on those who are most affected by these conditions. And today, Mr. Speaker, I'm announcing new and additional measures which will ensure appropriate demographic diversity of this intervention spend. It's very important, Mr. Speaker, sometimes when we have the intervention, these intervention programs, we do intend for the old, the elderly rather, to be beneficiaries, but sometimes these programs, either through NGOs or through members of parliament or through municipal corporations, we have young men who are not in the workforce, but who are also in need of assistance, who can be put to work. And therefore, what I'm announcing today is intended to cover a broader group of persons. The first component, Mr. Speaker, is $750 million for an independence cleanup of parish capitals, of which $550 million will be allocated to the National Solid Waste Management Authority, and $189 million, the total is 11 million short of 750, apologies for that, 189 million through members of parliament via the Constituency Development Fund. Amounts allocated via the Constituency Development Fund can be used for beautification, for bushing, drain cleaning, and for activities related to Jamaica 60. Wait, come in a second. So, just to be clear, Mr. Speaker, the needs across the length and breadth of Jamaica differ. Different communities, different constituencies have different needs, so we don't want to make it too narrow. Some places need a lot of drain cleaning. Others need beautification, would be a good exercise at this time. And for others, there may be a need to put on activities that are consistent with Jamaica 60, and we leave it to members of parliament to in the detailed allocation. With respect to the cleanup from NSWMA, by parish capitals I mean major town centres and parish capitals, just to be very clear. So you won't be left out. You are the parish capital, right? Mr. Speaker, $150 million for the trucking of water. And from the response in this House, Mr. Speaker, you understand that this is a real need. This will be done through the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development to facilitate the trucking of waters to areas experiencing water challenges due to the erratic nature of rainfall island-wide. Not exclusively, clearly, but especially the parishes of, and this is by the rainfall data, the parishes of, that's been provided to me, St. Elizabeth, Clarendon, and Portland, but it's not limited to that. Yes, St. Catherine, I'm sure that MLGRD will include. Mr. Speaker, $550 million in general welfare support for non-path beneficiaries. And to achieve an appropriate diversity, Mr. Speaker, $189 million through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, which has a particular targeting mechanism which is complementary to other modalities. And in addition to that, 189 million through the Constituency Development Fund for welfare and economic enablement activities. And Mr. Speaker, the municipal corporations, whenever we're doing these programs, we try to ensure they're included. So 70 million through the municipal corporations for welfare and economic support, which the Ministry of Local Government will manage and handle. And the 550 million, Mr. Speaker, also includes 52 million for the Poor Relief Department in the Ministry of Local Government, and $50 million through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security Public Assistance Department. As the Minister of Labour will tell you, you have to have all these modalities. There's some people who have no relationship with any NGO, no relationship with CDF or members of Parliament or councillors, no relationship with any of the other modalities and can't work, and they turn up at these offices that the Ministry of Labour has for public assistance, and we have to ensure that we're able to provide, especially this time when so many are being adversely affected. Mr. Speaker, we are also introducing a component, we're also repeating a component we had in the last fiscal year, where we're targeting the elderly on pensions who are at the bottom of the ladder. And for that, Mr. Speaker, we're allocating 550 million, of which 450 million will be for approximately 45,000 NIS pensioners who receive pensions of $15,000 or less per month. We're topping them up, Mr. Speaker. And in addition, that's 450 million, and 100 million, Mr. Speaker, for 10,000 social pensioners. The social pension is a new program that has been launched by this administration, that has been executed by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, where Jamaicans over a particular age, and I believe the age is 75, who have no regular source of income. They don't have NIS. They're not on a public pension. They don't have a job. They don't have any regular source of income, identifiable source of income. The Ministry of Labour and Social Security, the Ministry of Finance worked with the World Bank on developing a modality, pricing it, costing it, etc., for us to intervene and assist persons who fall into this category. Ministry of Labour has already signed up 10,000 Jamaicans for receipt of this monthly social pension, and will be topping that up with a support in aggregate of $100 million. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we'll have recess at some point and won't resume until September, and between now and then the back-to-school period we will experience the back-to-school period. And at this time of elevated prices and so forth, I think it's necessary to put something in place above and beyond what already exists. Members of Parliament, I am a member of Parliament, I have my back-to-school already, some of it already programmed, right? But what we're saying is we want to do more than we have done in the past, in recognition of the environment that we're operating in. So we don't want people to have to choose between back to school and providing for themselves. Mr. Speaker, we will be allocating $1.789 billion in back to school one-off grants, comprised as follows. Through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, we will be directing $1.6 billion for 160,000 PATH school-age children, Madam Speaker. So in addition to the regular PATH benefits, come August, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security will be in a position to send through $1.6 billion to all PATH families where they will get $10,000 per student. So if a family on PATH has 3 students, it will be $30,000. If a PATH family has 2 students, it will be $20,000, and so forth, Mr. Speaker.
Why they don't look happy at that side?
Mr. Speaker.
Why they don't look happy at that side?
Mr. Speaker.
You're working with it.
Mr. Speaker, in addition, Mr. Speaker, we recognize the experience that many persons who may be in need are not yet on PATH. Right? The social worker has not visited them and verified. Or some of them get bounced because they have a double-door fridge that somebody give them. Right? So, in addition to the PATH modality, so, Mr. Speaker, in addition to that modality, we'll have $189 million in back-to-school education grants and assistance to non-PATH, vulnerable students through the Constituency Development Fund. So, Mr. Speaker, you'll note a total of $9 million per constituency in additional support in the above-mentioned activities. I'm advised by the CDF that each member of parliament should consult with the director of the CDF to be guided on the administration for these additional activities. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this totals $3.8 billion. This totals $3.8 billion in social intervention expenditure, representing $2.7 billion of additional expenditure. As $1.1 billion is already in the budget. This incremental $2.7 billion of expenditure will initially be funded by advances from existing budgeted resources. These advances will be cleared following regularization of the expenditure in the first supplementary estimate 22-23. Mr. Speaker, the government is listening to the people. And Mr. Speaker, the government is responding to the people. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the minister has decided to run with it a bit. And this $2.7 billion of additional expenditure, totaling $3.8 billion in social intervention, is obviously a response to the pressure that they're feeling, which we understand, because there's no doubt the people are suffering. We have been saying for some time the government must do more to cushion the crisis. This is a step in the right direction. the throes of ecstasy being expressed by the other side indicates that they think it's an adequate expression of additional support. I mean, at the end of the day, 2.7 billion of additional expenditure isn't even a fifth of 1% of GDP. So it's not a huge amount of money to be spending on the society as a whole, given the situation that we're facing with the cost of living crisis that's on the people, the very high levels of gas prices, the high levels of food prices, and indeed the high interest rates that are facing business people and mortgage payers and so on. So, you know, we feel this is a good move in the right direction, but we feel a lot more needs to be done. We know that there's another $9 million per MP being made available. All the MPs are very happy about that. And speaking for myself, speaking for myself, I would have preferred if it were 15, but 9 is something that we are pleased to be able to respond to our constituents' needs with. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, we were expecting something. We didn't think they could continue to maintain such a tight clutch on the purse strings, given the situation in the country. We have come on record to say how much we think ought to be the ballpark in response to what's going on. This is really, as I said, a step in the right direction. It is a modest step, a very modest step, actually, a very modest step, given the crisis that we're in. But we won't, an opportunity like this, when everybody is expressing such glee at what they've heard today. We don't want to rain on the parade. So, Minister, thank you for what you have done, and we look forward to hearing much more to come. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to ask the Minister, through you, Speaker, to the Minister, the 25,000 per PPV, but you had not announced it in your budget presentation. It has now just come online. If the Minister could say why there was such a delay in it, because from when you announced it to the increase in petrol, the variance in the 25,000 to then till now, what had caused the delay?
So, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition was a little bit on two sides there, because it's either you run with it, or it's, you know, or it's a little bit, right? Or it is not enough. One of the two. But let me just say that this is fully consistent, Mr. Speaker, with our fiscal trajectory and targets, as we will see in due course. But thank you for your gracious, I have to tell them when I get them, your gracious remarks. No, with respect, good question. Here's what happened. You remember when we did the CARE program, announced it, and within like 4 weeks we had the thing up. But then we had a full complement of individuals at eGov, and here I'm talking, I know eGov is in Minister Vaz's portfolio. The labor shortage and the skill shortage in the country is real, and it affects government as well. And the turnover that we have had at eGov is incredible. I mean, they're very employable because these are young people who work on a variety of technology programs, software programs across the government. So they get snatched up the moment they're trained. And so when this thing was announced, the staff complement was severely compromised. There was a backlog of projects, and so that is what took a little extra. But the program came on stream in the middle, June 20th. We've had applications, but not enough. We've only had 3,000 people. And by application, it's really signing up, because it's just your name, your TRN, I think your PPV license, information you can sign up in 60 seconds if you have it on hand. So it's really signing up. But we've only had 3,000 so far. So we're going to keep it open until August. Hopefully, many more will sign up and receive the payment from the government.
Just on a follow-up, because when you did the program, I think it was last year, for the public, the drivers in the PPV category, the take-up then was also small. You have 33,000 registered public PPV drivers. But in this one, the Hackney carriage drivers are left out of this and is left for the route, because that was what was really announced. That it is, I'm just telling you what was announced, that it was for 17,000 operators and Hackney carriages were not included. So I just want to know why, if they're a part of the sector itself, why would they have been left out of it?
No, man, we have budgeted for all of them. We're budgeted for, I believe, 25,000. You remember I used a figure even today of 600 million.
Yes.
Right? So 25, to get to 600 million, you'd have to have 20-something thousand. 25 times 25 is 625. So a little less than 25,000 persons that we have budgeted for. So that is more than simply the subset that you're talking about. That is, the PPV licensee, the Hackney carriage, the contract carriage, etc. But we're going to have to work through the associations to get persons to sign up, because the resources are here and we are eager for persons to be assisted at this time.
I just want to just make a general comment on your presentation, because as much as there's this jubilation on that side, I am happy to see that there are non-path beneficiaries that are benefiting, because when you look on just what is happening out there, and I can speak as a rural member of parliament, it has been tough on our constituents. And when you have the 20 million out of your CDF, and you have that cap, especially on the welfare section and to do with other housing and things, when you are giving to the path and the majority of your constituents are not on path, it puts a strain on us as representatives and just what is happening out there. But I would want to say on the part that you're doing for the cleanup, and this is really to the Prime Minister himself, that 1 million that we have gotten for drain cleaning, just a consideration of more resources, because the 4 million we get in December for bushing is just not adequate, especially for the size constituencies for rural. And we are overtaken now with bush. That in some instances, instead of doing food packages or thing, because persons will work for that they would be getting and then provide for their family. But at least we're getting some additional works done on the roads with drain cleaning, with bushing, that we can do something positive for those deep rural, those constituencies that are large constituencies, and at the same time constituents getting something. Thing for me is not that it has to come through the MP, but you have agencies like the National Works Agency that can implement at something that the Works Agency is also doing, Prime Minister, that takes away from the resources that we get. When you start bushing for tender, when you start pushing bushing out there for tender, you take away at least 30% of what should go on the ground, right? But Prime Minister, the truth is I understand the whole procurement and wanting to, because you have said it before. But you have agencies as the National Works Agency that monitor these things, that can implement it And if that means if you don't trust the National Works Agency, then we can lock it down. It's simple. No, but you're still giving us the same $2 million worth of bushing in this last instance. I mean, believe me, Prime Minister, you take away 30% of that amount. That should actually go into the streets by giving it to contractors. Believe me. So take a look at that, but I'm just proposing that seeing what is happening out there, that we really have not had a massive bushing program or cleaning program, and it is bad out there, that in some instances you can look at expanding that at one instance persons are getting something, but at least they're doing something that will enhance our aesthetics of the country.
Thank you, member, for your contribution. In our constitutional setup, the Minister of Finance is a member of Parliament, so I'm acutely aware to the path, non-path, and hence the design. All right? We don't mind. Well, no. So the path, non-path distinction is important. With respect to the bushing, because we're listening, and I've heard you make that comment before, that's precisely why the design this time is much more open. In the previous iterations, we have said 4 care packages, for example, right? And the recognition is that constituencies differ in their needs, and you have more need for one thing versus another constituency. This person here has a different need, and hence we have many the 3 million on the cleanup, bushing, drain cleaning, and general stuff related to Jamaica 60. The one on the welfare, economic enablement. If people want to do care packages, just a broader application to take account for the diversity in the demographic setup, population count, and rural-urban nature of the constituencies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Clark. Mr. Speaker, we just have 2 more items, very short, items to be dealt with by the Minister of Finance. That's the Bauxite Production Levy Act, Capital Development Fund, withdrawal number 1, order 2022 resolution, and the report of the Standing Finance Committee regarding the monetary policy statement covering the second half of 2021 and the Bank of Jamaica's quarterly monetary policy report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The CDF? Yeah, you've been waiting for that one.
What you don't know about that?
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to introduce the Bauxite Production Levy Act, Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1, Order 2022. Mr. Speaker, as you and my other colleagues in this Honourable House are aware, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute was established by the Government of Jamaica in 1975 as a regulatory, planning and development agency to manage the sovereign aspects of the government's participation in the bauxite aluminum industry. The JBI was made and is responsible for monitoring and studying the alumina industry and advising the government on matters pertaining to the industry locally and internationally. And, Madam Speaker, it's primarily funded from levies on the bauxite industry through the Capital Development Fund. Mr. Speaker, JBI's primary operations are not revenue-generating activities. However, over the years, the JBI has expanded its operation to include the provision of laboratory services on a commercial basis to generate some revenues. As their primary function, the JBI continues to contribute to the bauxite and alumina industry in Jamaica through research and continued monitoring, which encourages bauxite companies to remain compliant with applicable laws and regulations. During the fiscal year 2021-2022, in carrying out its regulatory responsibilities, the JBI participated in 8 environmental performance meetings and analyzed 337 commercial samples from different categories, including water samples from the areas around the bauxite plant and residue disposal areas to ensure the bauxite operations remain environmentally sound. So the JBI does value-added work for communities in which bauxite is found, in terms of environmental and so on, right? Additionally, the JBI assisted the JISTV, looking doubtful over there. The JBI assisted the JISTV Alpart plant by conducting simulation tests on bauxite samples from its mines to assess whether it can be processed and the effectiveness of chemical additives on the proceeds. The results of these are expected to assist JISTV Alpart in restarting their refinery operations following their closure in 2019. For the fiscal year 22-23, total budgetary support for the CDF, this is the, not the previous CDF, this is the Capital Development Fund, is expected to cover approximately 73% or 268.48 million of the JBI's operating expenditure of 367 million, i.e. the remaining 27% is expected to be funded from other income and reserves. Mr. Speaker, the JBI has been granted budgetary support totaling 1.1 or $1.2 billion approximately from the Capital Development Fund during the 5-year period 2017-18 to 2021-22. And the balance in the CDF as at the end of fiscal year 2021-22 was $3.8 billion, which is adequate to provide the support required for the JBI in 22-23. Mr. Speaker, this amount, 268.48 million, was also included in the approved Jamaica public bodies estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 2023. It is therefore proposed, Mr. Speaker, that a withdrawal of $268.48 million be made from the Capital Development Fund in line with the Bauxite Production Levy Act in budgetary support for the Jamaica Bauxite Institute for fiscal year 2022-23. Mr. Speaker, as I have emphasized since I have started to pilot these orders annually, we are committed and continue to only withdraw from the Capital Development Fund in line with the Bauxite Production Levy Act to facilitate the budgetary support of the JBI. So the Bauxite Levy, the Capital Development Fund was dwindled, went all the way down, and we are slowly building it up and using it only in accordance with the Bauxite Production Levy Act. Mr. Speaker, the Bauxite Production Levy Act Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1, Order Resolution 2022 is hereby submitted to this Honourable House for approval.
Mr. Speaker, this matter of the withdrawal from the CDF has been with us for many, many years. It's largely routine, and especially as it is seeking to provide resources to the JBI, I think we have to support it, with the only caveat that we continue to expect through the JBI greater vigilance in its function as main regulator for the industry. We have seen in recent times, well, and before, the concerns of the citizen about the impact of mining across Jamaica. And I think one of the functions of the JBI was to ensure that proper measures are put in place, such as the reclamation of land, such as the enabling greater environmental protection across the length and breadth of Jamaica. And sometimes we're not sure that we are actually getting value for money. So we would like to see greater proactivity, and perhaps the Parliament should be in a position every year to consider a report from the JBI in that regard. The bigger question remains, because the Jamaican public has this love-hate relationship with especially the bauxite alumina sector. And it's a feature in all countries where there is mining, that how do you coexist with that activity which is depleting a natural resource and the livelihood that it provides. And this is where, Minister, I really would love us to focus, because if people were seeing real tangible benefits, as they used to, from the proceeds of the bauxite levy, so that when there are deficiencies in infrastructure, we are called upon to approve funding from the CDF for that, then the more that would happen is the more I believe people would be a lot more understanding about the mining activities. And I did make in my sectoral presentation this year a proposal, because there are MPs inside here who are from bauxite communities. And there's no reason why these MPs should not have a more pivotal role in guiding the minister in how some of these funds, the revenues generated from the industry, are spent to do the reclamation, to do various interventions in the constituencies to alleviate the harm that mining can do. So, Minister, I really want to put that on the table. There could be a standing committee of this Parliament that comprise members to focus on mining and to see how the gap can be bridged, not only in terms of public education, but also actual resources that will return to the communities so that people will see that they do get certain benefits from mining. There's no greater environmentalist than me, but I appreciate mining. If as a former minister of mining, but you know, sometimes people say the bauxite industry must shut down or we are at an end, and people don't realize that if you don't have bauxite, you don't have alumina, you don't have aluminum, you can't take plane, you can't drive cars. So we need to think sensibly about these things. And mining does have a future, but we have to be far more responsible, and we have to ensure that the benefits flow back to the communities and of course, it be sustainable. Minister, I take it that you are still responsible for CAP. So perhaps you might want to give us an update on the situation now with Jamalco, because you do get revenues from that enterprise. When are we going to see Jamalco reopen, and what is the prospect for the future in relation to Jamalco? I know what is happening with JISTV and the former Noranda, but we still want to know when we're going to see Jamalco, and perhaps you could also state whether or not the insurance proceeds have been fulfilled. Thank you.
Just on the note that the member from East Kingston touched on, Minister, I mean, my constituency is one that is also affected by bauxite. The largest deposit left for Jamalco is actually in Mile Gully, and they are currently mining there now. But just say at the same time how you make a withdrawal from the CDF annually. MPs that are representative of constituencies that are affected by bauxite, we get $4 million every 3 years to help with putting back into the communities. And I would want us to remember why the levy was, there was a levy put on to bauxite mining, which was really to put back not only for budgetary support, but actually to go back into the communities that have been affected. So I want the government to reconsider what goes back into these communities that are affected by bauxite, because we have not lived up to the expectations of these communities. I mean, land reclamation is one thing, but when you dislocate a whole community and family, and then at the end of the day, there's no infrastructure that follows with it. Many of these communities that have been affected by bauxite have no water, have no proper roads. They're lacking just modern infrastructure. So this $4 million that we're getting is just woefully inadequate for what has happened to these communities. So to reconsider how much more, but not only to take the levy, this from the CDF, for budgetary support, but to actually give it back to the communities is something I'd like you to consider.
Thank you, members, for your contribution. I mean, one thing we definitely can agree on, because it's fact, bauxite is a national resource. We can also agree that it's a non-renewable resource. It has a finite life, and I don't have the data here, whether it's 25 or 30 or 40, but at some point over the next few decades, this is going to be depleted. 40 years, member says. So I think it's important that whatever revenues we derive from it, I would want to submit to you that we don't use it for recurrent activities, i.e. activities that you spend it today and it's gone, outside of the Bauxite Production Levy Act. The Bauxite Production Levy Act allows for this withdrawal to support the administration of the Jamaica Bauxite Institute, because the argument is the revenues are here because the JBI exists and can support industry. So that is allowed by law. What we don't want to do is what we have been forced to do in the past. Every time Jamaica has had an economic shock, we've gone into the JBI to support recurrent activities. Let it be known, let it be said, let it be observed that we had the greatest economic contraction in our history, and we did not touch the Capital Development Fund. Okay, and that's by design. The Capital Development Fund over the last 5 years, it went from $1.4 billion, and today it stands at $3.8 billion. So over the past 5 years, the Capital Development Fund has tripled in size. And what we want, just to have what we want, members, is for the Capital Development Fund, we want to grow it and get to a stage now we can do something significant with it, right? A significant capital spend that can benefit the communities. So in the meantime, out of the central government, yes, can hold me to that. Out of the central government budget, what we should do is the kind of support that you're asking for, member, in the communities to help. Absolutely, but let's do that through central government activities and there was a time we used to make, I was just reading some stuff the other day, just before we had the alumina crisis in 1985, measured in terms of oil dollars. So if you look at the revenue from the levy in relationship to the amount we pay for imported oil, right? So our the relationship was just over 40%, i.e. what the levy inflows annually represented 40% of our oil bill outflows. I mean, today, it's like, not because of the oil bill, but because of the levy, it's, minuscule in terms of its percentage. So we want to, even if we have to do a restructured levy at some point, right, because of the nature of it, let the levy flow into Capital Development Fund. Let us go from 1.4 to 3.8 to 10, yeah, to 15 to 20, and then we can do major programs that can last 50 years, rather than to take from it willy-nilly. So what you'll see while I am Minister of Finance, come every year just for this amount to fund JBI, which is in the Bauxite Production Levy Act. This is totally in order. And what I will do is leave the Capital Development Fund to grow and to build and to be used eventually for legacy defining policies, with priority given to the areas where it's affected, Now, I know that we have things like the Bauxite Community Development Program that are doing lots of work, greenhouses and so on. Yeah, and so on. But just to recognize it. With respect to the question you asked me, I'd ask for your indulgence to allow me to, I presented an update a few months ago, I believe, since the budget, maybe about April or so, if I can remember, I presented an update on CAP. And at the time, I'd said that we expect production. I had given, I don't want to ad-lib it. We had said June for part of it, and a couple of weeks ago, I'd sent some photos out of the loading of the bauxite trains at Jamaica that had begun. I will come back, because I have clearly it's within my portfolio responsibility. I'm very keenly aware of the impact of it on our growth numbers. So when the governor talks about, you heard him say it today, he talks about 2 to 4% growth projected for this fiscal year. A part of that, comes from the anticipation of Jamaica restarting its operations. But I will come specifically and update the House on that. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask that.
While you're at it, and you come to update the House, could you also update the House on the bauxite levy situation? You've been to this House several times where there have been outstanding sums and that sort of thing. Could you just give an overview as to what's happening to the levy while you're at it?
I can do that at the same time. And, for us to have a frank conversation about it as well. Right? It's a complicated subject for good reason. It exists because we can't, in this world of transfer pricing and multinational operations, we can't identify the profit, so we go after the revenue, but it's suboptimal in that sense. So it is a challenging area, but I will come and update the House as to where we stand on it, inclusive of any changes that we might need to make going forward. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the resolution be approved by the House.
The question is that the motion be approved. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which which was given earlier by the leader of House Business, and that's the BOJ report.
So move.
Mr. Speaker, we don't need to debate we were just here at 10 o'clock, we heard the governor. So I conclude on the matter, Mr. Speaker, and ask that the motion be put to the House for their approval.
Question is that the motion be put to the floor for approval. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, from Madam Deputy House Leader, it is not contemplated for us to do any further business today, and so I therefore ask that the House adjourns for a date to be fixed. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a date for the House to adjourn, for a date to be fixed. If we have to come back next week, we will so advise members. Thank you.
The question is that the House now adjourn until a date to be fixed. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. This thing now stand adjourned.
Hi, my name is Dimitri.
And I'm Jamani. And we're here with UNICEF Jamaica,
JN Foundation,
and FIA Foundation.
We are here in Halfway Tree talking to the people about road safety and how it affects us children. Follow us.
What do you think can be done to prevent child fatalities on our roads today?
Well, I can say that children is to be at home by 8 o'clock. They are not supposed to on the road. Their mother supposed to taking care of them because they are little and they are not adults. They are supposed to be in their bed.
What do you think you can do to prevent child fatalities on our roads today?
I think that the motorists should be more vigilant of their surroundings and take proper precautions.
More stoplights and more cross pedestrian and look more careful.
Right, listen me now. Because you as a young girl growing up, you have to know the right. A taxi then the right. You know, say enough going on because enough car on the road, you enough for the driver, them are some young driver too. So to prevent accident with child, parents be more careful how them put them children on the road. You see it, so that's my answer. You see it and careful.
This has been the X Marks the Spot Vox Pop. Thanks for watching. Bye.
These videos are intended to be used to complement the instruction of this subject, by classroom teachers as a teaching aid, by independent learners as a review tool, to enhance and improve the understanding of these topics, resulting in improved performance in CSEC examinations. At the end of this section, you should be able to define weathering, list the types of weathering, describe the process of weathering, identify the products of the weathering process. Soil is the surface of the Earth's crust formed by weathering of rocks. It consists of two main layers, the topsoil and the subsoil, which sit on a bedrock. There are three main types of weathering: mechanical weathering, chemical weathering, and biological weathering. Mechanical weathering is the breakdown of rocks into small pieces without changing their components by factors such as wind, rain, and change in temperature and pressure. Wind blowing over rock surfaces carrying small soil particles will cause small bits of rocks to break away, so the rock appears acne-like, having pits where bits of rock have been chipped away by the action of the wind-swept sand particles. At high temperatures, rocks expand. When it gets cold, the rocks contract. This alternate action to expanding and contracting causes rocks to crack and eventually crumble. Water causes both mechanical and chemical weathering. The continuous movement of water against rock will cause it to break into smaller pieces. Also, the action of gravel bashing against the rock as it is carried by moving water will cause the rock to break up. Water can also cause chemical weathering. When it rains, water removes some minerals which are soluble, leaving the insoluble minerals which cause the rock to break up easily. Chemical weathering involves the action of chemicals, usually in rain, which can react with carbon dioxide to form carbonic acid. It can also change rock components. Biological weathering involves the action of living organisms, which breaks up rocks by their actions. Let's review. Weathering is the process which produces soil, and there are different types of weathering. Let's now learn more about soils. Section 2. At the end of this section, you should be able to list the components of soil, conduct experiments to determine properties of soil types, explain the importance of each of the soil components. Soils are characterized by their particle size. Based on the particle size, soils are classified as clay, loam, sand, and gravel. Particles 0.002 millimeter in diameter and smaller is called clay. 0.002 millimeters to 0.02 millimeters is called loam. 0.02 millimeters to 2 millimeters is sand, and those above are called gravel or small stones.
Develop a sense of purpose that says you're not here by accident. You are here for greatness. You are here with destiny in mind. You are supposed to do something great, and you are on that pathway. There are persons who are in the departure lounge of life, at the end of their life, and they look back and they have regret because they never took time to uncover and develop a sense of purpose. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do before I leave this 7 billion people planet called Earth? What am I supposed to accomplish? Having a sense of greatness that's in you. You're talented, you have gifts and abilities. Some of you are good with numbers, some of you are good with words, some of you are good with both, some of you are artistic, creative, some of you are sports oriented, and there are many things. And you take time to discover what are you passionate about. What can I just do naturally? I can jump out of my sleep and do it easily. Speaking now to your talents and abilities, your giftings. All of these come into your sense of purpose. The things that you are to do in life as you are to impact people. When you dream, when you close your eyes, what do you see yourself doing? And knowing that the sky is the limit. Second thing I want to say quickly is that you must learn to persevere. I heard Marquis speak about perseverance. Everybody say perseverance. Sometimes we don't achieve much because we give up too easily. You have to learn, if you want good, your nose have to. Yes, man, you have to get your feelings hurt and still go on. When I was doing my PhD, boy, a man tell me, man, people seem to like you. Wayne, why don't you just leave this program and go back to your country? You have a master's. The PhD is not for you. Why don't go and make money? And that was a racist comment because I was black. I was the only black person in the program. And he was saying things that hurt me, and I didn't want him to see me offended. I left his presence, went into my room, and I cried. But I decided to continue in my effort for excellence. Are you hearing me? And so perseverance means to continue a course of action in spite of difficulty, in spite of opposition. When they fight you down, when bad mind reach you, and they're fighting you down, and they say you're not the right gender, young ladies, and they say you don't deserve to be here, don't pay no attention, press on nonetheless. And it means you also have to have the right people around you. Be careful of the company you keep. As you go through life, you're going to make mistakes. As you go through life, you may fail at something. You want people around you who can encourage you to get up again.
Aging. What will this look like for you economically, financially, socially? Will our older years be golden? With birth rates on the decline and life expectancy on the rise, our countries may be experiencing a crisis. On the next Caribbean Economic Forum, we discuss solving the aging population crisis in the Caribbean. On Thursday, July 7th at 8 p.m., tune in to this station or join us online.
Hi, I'm Eliana Charles, and I'm here with my father, Pernell Charles, and today we will be planting a guava tree.
And that's our favorite fruit, and we got this tree from the forestry department. So, let's get it done. Some of the tools you need when planting a tree: a fork, you'll need a shovel, a good old machete.
And you need a watering can.
The first thing we're going to do is we dig a hole and make sure that it is deep enough, wide enough to fit the tree. And we're going to keep, of course, our soil so we can backfill the hole. We have planted our guava tree, and we invite the entire Jamaica to plant a tree. Plant a tree,
Protect Jamaica,
and preserve the planet.
These videos are intended to be used to complement the instruction of this subject, by classroom teachers as a teaching aid, by independent learners as a review tool, to enhance and improve the understanding of these topics, resulting in improved performance in CSEC examinations. There are three main types of soil: sandy soil, clay soil, and loam or garden soil. Here are the instructions for soil type practical exercise to be conducted at home. First, find an empty, clean quart jar with a cover. An old jam or mayonnaise bottle with a cover works very well for this test. Fill the bottle about 2/3 full with clean water. Next, take a sample of soil. Break the large clods or clumps apart so it will fit through the jar opening. And fill the jar with water until it is nearly full, leaving about 3 inches of air space at the top. Screw on the lid and shake it vigorously for a minute or two until all the soil particles are broken down into suspension in the water. Let it stand for 10 minutes. Now, match your results with these samples to determine the type of soil which you have tested. Sandy soils are typically comprised of approximately 80 to 100% sand, 0 to 10% silt, and 0 to 10% clay by volume. Sandy soils are light and typically very free draining, usually holding water very poorly due to very low organic content. Loam soil are also common in the valleys and flat areas or floodplains surrounding rivers and streams. Loam soils are typically comprised of approximately 25 to 50% sand, 30 to 50% silt, and 10 to 30% clay by volume. Loam soils are somewhat heavier than sandy soils, but also tend to be fairly free draining, again due to typically low organic content. Clay soils are very common in certain areas, particularly around urban areas. Clay soils are typically comprised of approximately 0 to 45% sand.
Nationals, to give them the opportunity to work in the member states of the Caribbean nations. And now we have approved also laborers, which are not really the skilled laborers, but laborers we need in our countries, in our sister nations, and that we have removed all the barriers for them.
Agricultural labor.
Agriculture, and also security officers, etc., and domestic laborers. On industrial policy, which is a portfolio that was added to Suriname's responsibilities, the conference received a presentation from Suriname on the initial work review taken by the National Committee with the support of the CARICOM Secretariat, the CDB, and the Caribbean Export. A substantive paper on industrial policy was circulated for review and consideration by the member states. A ministerial task force will be established to further give body to the formulation and implementation of an industrial policy for the region. The community also looks forward to the 50th anniversary of CARICOM next year, and celebratory events are expected to take place across the community throughout a 12-month period. The meeting has presentation from the private sector, labor, and the civil society, and the Dean of the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors Program representing the youth of the region also made a presentation. We congratulated in particular the youth of the community on their active engagement and participation in the CARICOM Youth Forum held on the 24th of June 2022. And the Youth Summit will be held later this year in Suriname. Noteworthy is that Suriname has offered a 10 hectare of fertile land to the youth of the region. And with that, I conclude my remarks regarding the meeting. And we are available to respond on any question or remarks you may have. And I give the floor back to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much, and may God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the press, now is your time to bring forward your questions. When you state your question, please state your name, the media you belong to, and to whom the question is directed. Who will be the first? The mics are set up at your left and your right. Yes, you can come up to the front.
Good evening, everyone. Vishani from the newsroom in Guyana. To the chair of CARICOM, President Santoki, you spoke about mandating COTED to remove, to conclude all of their programs to remove the non-tariff trade barriers. What exactly does that mean? And I'm seeking clarity. In effect, does that mean that by the end of next month, agricultural produce will be able to move freely throughout the Caribbean? And secondly, there was much anticipation ahead of the conference for a regional energy security policy. Can you tell us perhaps how talks on that advanced during the conference? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, there were a lot of decisions. We took as heads. What I have presented is just a summary. And those questions are giving us the opportunity to further elaborate on other decisions we have taken. As regards the removal of barriers, I've just informed you that we removed the barriers for the domestic laborers. And that was an issue we are discussing for many years. And we had declared that in our opening ceremony that we are here, that this conference should make a difference between this one
another conference and that we need to take action. And we decided. We took action on all the people who are looking for opportunities in sister nations to find an opportunity as laborer in the security and domestic and the agriculture. Well, now we have to remove all the barriers and they can have free movement and they can find labor in our sister nations. On the other side, Guyana is the lead head on the agribusiness. So there is a comprehensive strategy presented to the heads, which was approved already. And there are a lot of actions planned now for the implementation of this strategy. And yes, if you want to have that movement of agricultural products, that agribusiness, you need to remove other barriers in the area of logistics, in the area of connectivity. And that was one of the issues. The transportation issue was on the agenda. And we agreed and we approved also timeline that we'll decide for a comprehensive study. On one hand, how we can strengthen the connectivity among all the islands, but also to take quick steps to enable us to move forwards, bringing our products to our sister nations. And we can elaborate further. The Prime Minister is also available to give you more detail. The SG is available to give you more information on that. And as you may recall, when we had that meeting as Caribbean leader, CARICOM, in Los Angeles on the Summit of the Americas with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, that we had agreed that there will be joint approach between CARICOM and the leadership of the United States of America on 3 topics. And that is food security, that is the energy issue, and that is the climate crisis, the finance. So we had elaborated on those topics. We agreed that there will be 3 committees on the side of CARICOM. Those committees will be led by prime ministers, head of states, and will comprise of experts from the Caribbean countries. And there is a follow-up already to discuss those topics with the leadership of the United States, and there are meetings planned for the coming days. There was a special topic on climate finance, and the Secretary General can elaborate on that topic further. That was discussed thoroughly. And later on, I think the SG and also the Prime Minister can elaborate. But I think if there are no other questions on those topics, maybe you can take all the questions. Then, yeah, Mr. Cairo.
Good evening, all. Ivan Cairo from the Warate newspaper and the Caribbean Media Corporation. Mr. President, you just mentioned the regional strategy for energy. I would like to have more on that. What are the decisions that has been taken now? Within how many years should they be established? And also, that question is for you, Mr. President. And also regarding the industrial policy, could you tell us what are the main elements for this policy? And I have also a question for Prime Minister Gonsalves. That's about the transportation and connectivity in the region. We have heard Prime Minister Pierre about LIAT. Could you tell us more